first of all, I want to publicly thank Pelosi for coming here for Fremont first. Chair of the Women's Caucus, and one of the things I want to talk a lot about is an update of what's going on with the California Democratic Party. But let me just tell you a few more updates before that. I'm now the communications director for the Alameda County Young Dems, so we're getting more of a progressive voice heard in that organization. We also, today, there was Muslim Democrats and Friends Club open in Fremont, and I was there to sign up, and I see a couple faces that were there as well. And that's going to be another loud voice that we're going to have on the Alameda County Central Committee. So we're definitely pushing that. Along with Christine, we have Terry Templeton here, who is she's going to speak to. She's a member of the Progressive Caucus and running for Tom's as well. So I think we're in good company as we live stream. The big story that I have is I'm going to be running for chair of the Veterans Caucus. We have a little bit of a backstory there. We had an election that didn't work out so well. We weren't allowed to run, so we challenged it formally and went through the process. And now we're going to have an official election. And I've been working with people through this whole way, and we're really excited to be where we are at. And it's going to be this coming up weekend. And then once we have the Veterans Caucus here, the Women's Caucus, we have an ally in the Arab American Caucus, the Progressive Caucus. We can start making these caucuses work for the people statewide, show the rest of the country what we're doing in California, and be that model that we want to lead the nation. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Christine Pelosi to talk about the Women's Caucus and all she's been doing.
Well, thank you. As Cullen mentioned, it's Veterans Day weekend, so first and foremost, thanks to Cullen and our other veterans for their service, and we appreciate you very much. We were Friday night, my mom, Nancy Pelosi, and I, and my dad, we were at Swords to Plowshares. That's our Veterans Day. They actually do it the night before. Swords to Plowshares is an organization in San Francisco that started off built around the whole idea of beating swords into plowshares to advocate for peace. A woman named Sally Lilienthal, who was very strong on the nuclear freeze back in the 70s and 80s, also founded Swords to Plowshares, and they do a lot with veterans transitional housing and veterans homelessness and PTSD issues. And as the years have gone by, and we've seen more and more of what traumatic brain injury and military sexual trauma and some of the other injuries that the prosthetics, now that more and more people are surviving injuries that would have killed them in prior wars. On the one hand, it's wonderful that they've survived. On the other hand, we haven't caught up with technology in terms of some of the prosthetics and some of the care that we need for them. So that's something that we were talking about Friday night, in addition, of course, to fighting the right-wing Koch brothers agenda to try to privatize the VA. So I think it's something we really have to be talking about. Because I am the founding officer of the DNC Veterans and Military Families Council. I'll give you a brief report from Las Vegas at the DNC meeting, and then I will take you into next week's executive board meeting here in California. So a month ago, we were in Las Vegas, Nevada for the Democratic National Committee meeting. As some of you heard, it was a time of transition. I will say, as one who, ever since I was elected as a young Dem to the DNC 21 years ago, my first two resolutions were campaign finance reform and eliminating the at-large delegates. So my life hasn't really changed since then in terms of the focus. I still think we should have more shared power. I still think we should have more nominations from the community and not just the chair getting to name all the people that the chair gets to name. And so I told the staff, don't be surprised when I stand up, as I do every time, and vote against myself getting a committee assignment, because I thought my committee assignment on resolutions should have been nominated from my region and not just something that the chair got to choose. Though I think he had good taste in picking me. I still voted no, because I think that the power should be in the people. So one good thing that we did do was campaign finance reform. This last time we were going to Las Vegas. We were there within weeks of the shooting that injured almost 600 people and killed 58 people. And as some of you may know, back in February at the DNC, I had tried to pass a resolution banning all corporate PAC money. Now that failed, but I came back with a resolution that said, let us at least walk our talk and ban all the corporate PAC money that differs from our platform. So the predatory lenders, the tobacco companies, the nuclear, gun makers, those are the kinds of things. And we did get that passed. And it happened because a woman named, well, because a lot of very devoted people worked on it for months, but going into Las Vegas, there was a woman named Sandy Phillips that we've been working with for a couple of years now on gun violence prevention and on healthcare. Her daughter, Jessie, was one among those murdered in Aurora at the movie theater in Colorado. And she and her husband sued the gun makers. They lost because of the federal immunity laws, and they were actually hit with the bill for the gun makers' attorney fees. So they had to sell their house, and they're traveling around. They have a trailer. They're traveling around. They're actually in California for a few months. So it's horrible. I talk about, you know, insult to injury to loss. But Sandy wrote a petition saying, I lost my daughter to gun violence. I want all political actors not to take money from these gun manufacturers. And if you say that you're going to fight the gun industry, then don't take their money. And 22,000 people signed that within 4 days, which is pretty awesome. Because it's a little esoteric saying sign a petition to the DNC about, you know, not taking money, but they signed it and it was good. And so I talked about her. And I think for so many people who were involved last summer in trying to create the most progressive Democratic platform ever, we did have some moments of moral clarity. We said, for example, 5 words. We condemn predatory payday lenders. Yes. Woo! So then why are we taking their money? Right? So why are we taking their money? It was great to have it as our DNC platform, but if we were still taking payday money, then people didn't believe us. And so my point was, you not only have to do what we did in Las Vegas with passing a resolution as we did, calling on reiterating our gun safety in our platform, and also adding to that we oppose the SHARE Act and any rollbacks of silencer safety laws, and also that we oppose the sale of bump stocks. We did the policy, right? That was the talk. But we also banned the money, and that was the walk. Woo! So I think we have to do both, walk and talk, so that people believe us. And so I would say to all of you who are candidates, I know there's a few, some elected officials too, you have to figure out where you're going to draw that bright line. You know, if you're for single payer, then don't take pharma money, right? If you're for no more wars, then don't take nuclear money, right? If you're for, you know, the environment, then don't take fracker money, right? I mean, you go down the list, and obviously, if, like me, I'm still wearing this Nancy Pelosi rainbow band. This was from Pulse nightclub. This was the homage to the gay community after the Pulse nightclub. I've been wearing this for a year and a half, but we still need to do something about this. But whatever you decide, however you decide you're going to campaign for office, also make sure that people see it in your pledge. Because people are trying to decide if they trust you. They're trying to decide what kind of person you are. And one way you can show who you are is to say, these are some of the things I'm going to fight for, and this is the way I'm going to fight for them. Like I said, for me, I didn't take corporate money or corporate lobbyist money in my races for DNC. I voted against myself when it came to time to stand up and vote for committee assignments because I oppose at-large people, even me. You know, I think you have to be able to do those kinds of things. And that takes us right into what we're doing in the Women's Caucus next weekend. Because again, we're going to have a very difficult set of conversations in our Democratic Party. When I was first out of law school, it was right around the time of Anita Hill. And Anita Hill had come forward, and it was Democrats. It was the Democratic Party. Some Democrats we love and we adore who wouldn't give her a fair hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee, who voted for Clarence Thomas to be on the Supreme Court. And while they ushered in the Year of the Women, they also ushered in an employer-centric approach to sexual harassment in the workplace. In other words, employers got out and said, how can we not get sued? They didn't say, how can we help victims? How can we create equity in our workplace? And so when I first started, I was in the city attorney's office. Actually, one of the first things I did, because I took a pretty aggressive deposition, was actually detailed to the labor team to do an investigation on sexual harassment in the public works department. And then I became a district attorney, assistant prosecutor, and I was working in the sexual assault and domestic violence unit, focusing on child sexual assault. And again, a lot of what we were dealing with were victims who, when they had the courage to come forward, they felt they were re-victimized by the system, or the way the laws worked. When I was practicing, when I first started practicing, the jury instruction, not the defense attorney, the jury instruction was still, rape is a charge that's easy to make and hard to disprove. Now, if that's what they're telling the jury before they even consider the facts, what does that tell you? And when you looked at domestic violence, the jury instruction still is parents' right to discipline a child reasonably. So we have ingrained in our society that violence is the answer. We have it ingrained in our society not to believe our children, not to believe people who come forward. And the way that the systems are set up, the employers want to defend themselves. As we're just talking about where I went to, growing up Italian Catholic, I was on arraignment calendar when we arraigned the first pedophile priests in San Francisco. And on the other side of the courtroom were people from all of the schools, Sacred Heart, SI, Convent, all people I knew growing up, who are now defending the priests pro bono. It was a very ugly time, and the Catholic Church said we can police ourselves. Turns out they couldn't. My friends filmed the movie The Invisible War about military sexual trauma that some of you may have seen. It was out a few years ago. And again, that sparked a call for change, which was fantastic. But the generals refused to take investigations of military sexual assault outside the chain of command. And what are we finding now? Not only have they not fixed the problem, but some of the people who volunteered to do the investigating are now themselves under investigation for sexual assault. I'm not talking about misconduct, adultery. I'm talking about misconduct and conduct unbecoming. So clearly, if you look at what's happened over the past 25 years, the first awakening was employer-centric. It still required victims to prove that they were harmed. And as one young woman told me in the middle of a hearing, and I actually wrote a blog post about this, the judge had said to me on the break, well, if he stalked her, why isn't she crying? Because the requirement was force or fear. And she's like, why do I have to perform grief after I put my life back together in front of my abuser just so that he can be convicted of the felony that we all know he committed? But that's the point. It was focused on, well, if we would believe you if you were the perfect victim. Guess what? There are no perfect victims. No. And even if there were, there's something in our society called a devil's advocate. Right? We don't have the expression, let me be your angel's advocate. People say, let me be your devil's advocate, right? So we have to change that now. Now we have a moment. 4 weeks ago, I was part of a group that wrote a letter, an open letter to our legislature, condemning the pervasive culture of sexual harassment in California politics. And it was a bipartisan letter, and it requires a bipartisan solution, but let's face it, Democrats are in charge, and Democrats need to fix the problem.
Woo! Say it again for the people in the back, Christine.
Democrats are in charge, and Democrats have to fix the problem.
Right here.
We have to take this leadership. And so here's what we're doing. Over the past 3 weeks, we actually started a nonprofit. We said enough so that we could actually advocate for systemic change. We also realized pretty quickly that if we were only talking about people in politics or actresses in Hollywood, it's very classist, it's very elitist. Even if you make yourself your way to onto a movie set or into an internship in the Capitol, you're still exposed to power. That's still more power than most people have. So if we weren't also concerned about our workers in the fields, about our teachers in the schools, about the people in the back of the house of the restaurant who are still enduring sexual harassment just to get their share of a tip, we know some things that we have to do better. We know that, for example, if we paid everybody the minimum wage, including tip workers, you would take a lot of that pressure off. But we also know, in working with our friends from the Fight for 15, whom we adore, that some miscreants found their way into the Fight for 15 and were abusing the very women who had come to them to organize for 15 and a union. So while we can all complain about Roy Moore, and we should, in Alabama, and why he's a hypocrite for hanging the 10 Commandments and then violating them, the fact of the matter is we can't say that we stand for women or that we stand for vulnerable people if we're not walking our talk as a party. And that's what we're going to talk about on Saturday at the Women's Caucus. Woo! about some specific ideas that we have. We said day one, we want a hotline, a confidential hotline. We want you to stop policing yourselves. Forget the Assembly Rules Committee and the Senate Rules Committee. Take it out of politics. Don't put your assembly members in the position of having to defend their friends or prosecute their friends. Send it to the professionals. Have an independent inspector general like they do in the federal government, like they do in a lot of sheriff's departments and police departments. You can have an internal bureau of investigation, or you can have an inspector general. Make sure that you have services right away for victims. Because if I have mustered the courage to tell you that I am a victim of harassment and you are my supervisor, that right there should count as a complaint. That should automatically generate a complaint. It shouldn't be that you have to report it to someone and then I have to write it down. And I could, by the way, I'm at will, so I could be fired or you could be fired before a piece of paper ever makes itself into the system. But that's the way the Assembly works now. That's the way the Senate works now, and it's not working for them. And you're finding that out now as more and more women are coming forward and telling their stories and saying, wait a second, I didn't want to say this, but now that I heard that it happened to you, now I want to talk about it happening to me. Or he said it was only a one-time thing when he did it to her, but it wasn't a one-time thing because he did it to me. So as we're starting to realize that, we have to really just say, we're going to do this in a new way. First of all, in the legislature, we're going to get a hotline. We're going to give some victim services. We're going to have an ombudswoman in Sacramento to deal with these problems. And we're going to have systemic change and equity. You have to have either civil service protections for people who work in the Capitol, for employees, or you're going to have whistleblower and anti-retaliation rules. You simply have to do it. It's not fair for us to call young people to service, to ask these wonderful progressives to come forward, reluctant campaigners though you are, and get involved in the process if we're not going to respect you. And worse, we're not going to protect you. So I think we have to do both. We have to talk about safety, dignity, and that's why we're going to launch this week an equity campaign so people can really talk about that in the broader context. Because again, if we don't break through race and class, then we're not solving the problem. So while we go forward with that, we're going to give some resources. We have people coming from Futures Without Violence. We have who've been doing a lot of work on safety and equity in the workplace, and they've been experts on preventing domestic violence and sexual harassment for years and years and years. They're also funded by the federal government and local grants, so we don't have a problem with antagonizing state legislators by having experts come in, quite frankly. We are going to be hearing from people who are going to be giving specific information from We Said Enough in terms of some of the protections we're trying to build in there. And we're also going to be hearing from you, those of you who come to the meeting, about the things that you would like, the tools that you would like to have. What we're not going to do is what we usually do, which is here dedicate a big part of our meeting to free speech from politicians running for office, because we're not doing that this time. The campaign this time is an equity campaign. Woo! That's what I'm talking about. So I just wanted to be clear about that. I sent out the newsletter yesterday saying we're dedicating ourselves exclusively to this because we really do need to get in there, and there will be people who have the resources immediately, so that, and if you're watching this on live stream, 800-656-HOPE is the National Suicide Prevention Sexual Assault Hotline. If you need to call or you need to refer somebody. But again, I talked to Jackie Spear last night because she had a great op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle today, but I told her that as a former chief of staff on Capitol Hill, I was completely behind the changes they want to make in Congress. They do send you to an expert, but before you go to an expert, you have to go through weeks of what they call quote-unquote counseling. Now, when I was a chief of staff, we basically relied on the Whisper Network because someone would have a problem and we would say, let's just get her into a different office. Because if she has to go through months and months of so-called mediation and counseling before she can even file a formal claim, while she's still working in the office, she's not allowed to tell anybody that she has a claim going. If the boss ends up having to pay her, it comes out of the Treasury, a different fund, so it's not like you could go look and say, well, let me go look at this member's representational allowance and see, what they had to pay for salaries or bonuses or other, right? It doesn't come out of that, and you would never know. So right now, we have tremendous upstanders in our legislature and in our Congress. We also have perpetrators. And under the laws they've made for themselves, we will never know the names of the perpetrators. And so we have to change that at the state level, at the local level, and certainly at the national level. So she is, as I say, Jackie Spear and Nancy Pelosi have teamed up on that. That is to say, Jackie's is about the House itself. Eleanor Holmes Norton has something sort of for the Capitol in general. And then Nancy Pelosi is focused on what are we going to do about Title VII and amending Title VII and getting that through the committee process on the Democratic side so that we can amend Title VII so you can sue your harasser directly. Because right now you can't. You can sue your employer, but you can't sue the individual. And we have to get rid of the NDAs. The most important thing is to get rid of the non-disclosure agreements. Right. Again, just to wrap up, let's end where I started my legal career. In the time, and they told us this about the priests, they told us this about the military, they told us this, during the Anita Hill. They said, look, you don't want to make a big fuss out of this. You don't want to ruin your career by being that curiosity, that woman that was a troublemaker. It would be better for you, and it would help you heal if you could sort of sublimate it and not make it be the one thing that defined you. And that was what some people genuinely thought was a good thing. But a lot more people thought, this will be really good for our brand, this will be really good for our politician, this will be good for our parish, this will be good for our military unit, and people don't know this about the perpetrator. And so over the years, what we learned is that silence around sexual assault really led to stigma, and the person bearing the burden of the silence and the burden of the stigma was the victim, not the harasser, who clearly did not learn, in many cases didn't learn from the experience, and would be able to go on and go to other jobs, join boards, run for office, and not have to tell anybody. Meanwhile, the equity factors in terms of women's pay, a woman who has been sexually harassed on the job or abused on the job and has complained about it, the statistics show she has lost money. She hasn't gotten the promotion. She hasn't gotten the advances. And of course, obviously, if you have to be, flirt with the boss to get a raise, she didn't get the raise. So we need to talk about making a generational shift. This is really a moment where we think we can do that, and when we can put the legislators' feet to the fire and say, look, this isn't a Democratic problem, it's not a Republican problem, it's an American problem, and it's going to require everybody working together to find the solution together. So that's what we're going to do Saturday morning. I hope you'll join us. Hopefully someone will live stream for those who can't come. And in the meantime, again, we really appreciate the people who have been standing up. We know it's hard for people to go against their colleagues. We know it's hard for people to go against some of their peers and their friends. This isn't about, having a show trial in the press about a few people, because that will not solve the problem. Some people will have to face consequences, but that's not where we're at. We want to really fundamentally change the law, change the presumptions in court, so that people my daughter's age, 8 years old, and even younger, growing up in the public school system, will know that they're in a place of safety and equity, and really the sky's the limit for them. So thank you all for having me. We'll see you next Saturday at the Women's Caucus.